On the last tape, I started reading this book, and I have to tell you, you cannot believe how good this book is. This really has the inside dope on a lot of stuff. This is one of the books, if you have any love of Reno air racing, go down to a Barnes & Noble and just pick it up. And thanks to Dennis Toth for turning me on to this. This really is one of the best. And yes, it's still part of Christmas holidays, but we have a lot of stuff to get busy on. And in today's mail, I got a nice letter from Walt Brownell and some pictures of his Air Force. I want to share that with you, and then we're going to get down to shop. This is Walt's Outlaw. Flew this at the 97 Nats. Built completely following windy tapes, double star 60. Plans available from Tom Dixon for the Outlaw. Walt's Nacky for Classic, flown with an FP40 from Byron Barker. Flown at the 98 BRODAK contest, second place in advanced. You can tell, Walt likes elliptical wings too. Trauma was flown at the 96 Nats with ST51. Here's what Walt is known best for, aside from having a gigantic collection of windy videos, having a wife who wipes off the plane. We affectionately call her Nikita, and she always, absolutely always, is dressed to match the plane. Nikita, we love you. Hey. Anyway, down the shop. It's Christmas. Merry Christmas to everybody. Let's get to work. Now we're little by little finishing up our website, and we have some exciting new stuff going on out there. Please, if you haven't checked it out yet, check it out at wendyartnowski.com. And a special thanks to Elliot Scott, who has been my webmaster for the past 6-8 months, year, whatever. He's done a hell of a job. Now we have another special little thing going on that all the new subscribers, especially the overseas people, that seem to enjoy watching the tapes. I hope all you people that subscribe are going to be sharing these tapes with everybody. There's my man Mike building up another wing. Now, I try to start off every day of work here with some inspirational thing. The next step on this fuselage is going to be, I did a real extensive carving job on this, try to get it exactly the way I wanted it. The next step is going to be to just pop the tack glue off, and I'm going to try to relieve this, undersize it. Remember, what we're trying to do here is undersize it just a little bit. Now, there's two thoughts. One of the other thoughts I could do, and I've been trying to think about exactly how one is, I could lay out the cowl and this and then do all the molds at once, but I think it'd be more beneficial if I can get one mold going at a time. So the first thing is going to be to pull this piece off, just get a brand new blade in there, and pop that top block. Now again, I always try to lay it out and get a rough look at what this is going to look like relative to the more scale-like version that Gerald Champ has loaned us his fuselage. But it's in that direction that we're generally going, and we want to create that look even though it's going to be less scale. And we're going to be doing several of these molds for the top, bottom, back, whatever. And I wanted to just give a little idea of what we're trying to accomplish. First off, we try to get this area to be real accurate, because we're going to use this same shell on the plug that we're going to make, and obviously on all future fuselages. Also, we want to get this contour as close as we want, as close as possible, get all the little curves and everything in it. Because in effect, when we make this, we're making 100 of them at a time, maybe. I really don't know. Now, the next thing is to undercut it. In other words, by the thickness of the material we're going to mold. In this case, it's going to be 1/8 inch. So we'd like to take, if we could, 1/8 of an inch of material off the whole piece. Now, I've tried several ways of doing that. One is to paint the whole part with an ink marker and then sand and carve it off. I've tried painting it and sanding the paint off. I've tried a lot of different ways. I've tried taking the part, and when I wanted to undercut it, I want to see if I can show whatever method seems to work, and take a little tool that looks like a block of hardwood with a little razor blade cut in it that sticks out 1/8 of an inch. And then what I've done is put all little cuts in this. And as soon as I sand off the cuts, I know I have it undercut. In other words, it's like tire tread. Once you wear off all the tire tread, you can tell it. If this dimension here, whatever that dimension is, as soon as you get rid of those little cuts, like I said, as soon as I answer the phone, we'll be ready to start laying up this mold, the first piece. Let me get the phone. Things that I've learned. If you undersize a mold, if you cut this piece too much, and from time to time you get too aggressive, it's easy. You can put masking tape over the mold, duct tape to build up thickness, or you can, it's real easy, you can just put a piece of 30-second balsa. You also have a couple other tricks. If you oversize it, just go back and sand some more off wherever it's too fat. Make up a test shell. If the test shell doesn't look so good, give it to somebody, because these shells fit on other planes. It's not, this is the point I want to make, it's not critical. You would think, and it's funny, the Nobler turtle deck fits on a Cardinal, the Cardinal front piece fits on a Nobler. The planes are not a lot different in width, they're not a lot different in length, so if you make every one just a little bit longer than necessary, you can trim it to fit. Now when you want to trim it to fit, if you just keep cutting the front off the mold, because the front of the mold usually has a taper in it, so you trim a little, and it'll usually just fit right on, and the little piece in the back, so we always mold the pieces a little bit longer than they have to be, maybe an inch or so, and then we can just slide them forward until they kind of fit right up to the spinner. So there's a lot of advantages. The biggest advantage is once you do the carving, which we've already done, from this point on, we can make one of these every day for the cost of a sheet of wood. Never have to carve again. Try to be real careful with a brand new blade when I separate these so I don't mess up the edge. Whoop, there it goes. I've even left this a little oversized, even though in the real mold this is going to end right here. This will be a separate piece, but I'll mold it all in one piece in case anybody wants to make this top block. We can use this top block for either for other aeroplanes, or if somebody decides to make a Miss Ashley that doesn't have take-apart construction features. I try to keep this line, whoops, as clean as possible for obvious reasons. Okay, the whole thing now is there's these little dots I want to clean off of the original part. Then I want to take that piece and I want to make a real accurate, if I possibly can make it, of exactly an undercut of exactly 1/8 of an inch. So in other words, I want this piece to be, in essence, exactly 1/8 of an inch less, as if I peeled off a piece of 1/8 inch sheet right off the top. Made up a real simple tool. This is so simple it's ridiculous. I've got 1/8 of an inch of a razor blade sticking out the bottom. Real easy to figure out how to make this. Stick it through a piece of 1/4 inch, put a couple of drops of CA, and adjust the bottom to be equal to the size of the sheeting that you're going to use. And using this, I'm going to put a lot of scratches in the piece and then just sand out the scratches. The whole idea of all this stuff is to make tools, make parts that are inexpensive and easy to make. You don't need to have a milling machine or anything to do a lot of this stuff. You need simple hand tools, and you can make most of them. All it requires, lay it on a flat piece of glass, and about every 1/4 inch or so, just put an impression down. Now, if like you have eyes like I have that are pretty poor, one of the ways you can make this easier is when you're all done, take a pen, and usually you'll get about 2 ink lines in it, and it'll just stop writing. But you can basically get, once these lines disappear, and with this into it this much, and obviously you don't cut yourself. I should be giving lessons and not cutting myself. But this is a good way to undersize a part realistically. Oh, there goes the back piece. And it won't matter, we'll just tack glue this right back on. In fact, I don't even need that right now. And this should give you a good indication of when you're 1/8 of an inch undersize. Now I'll also mark the inside because again I have to take that into account. I have all the stripes on there. I can mark this the same amount, 1/8 of an inch thinner. Watch this pen not right. Now I always found that rather than taking a full 1/8 inch, it's always better to take a little less and then leave the line on, because it's always, these things want to spread back, so it's always better to take a little less. Look at it, like I said, this pen is afraid of me. Sure, buy these pens at Staples at a discount, no problem. Boy, oh boy, if I could invent a pen that would never stop writing. Look at it, I got two, there we go. But this gives me a rough indication of where I have to reduce this to. And of course I want to try to maintain the contour. But the point is, once you've done this once, you probably can figure out if you build the same plane over and over, or you can adapt. Now we've taken the Seafire molds and made Nobler parts, and we've made SV11 parts, and just by moving them around a little bit, adding, if you want to make it a little thicker, you just add a 30-second shim to it. Very adaptable. Most people don't realize how adaptable this is. Now I'm going to leave this line on. When I'm all done, I want to see this line. That's the whole deal. I'll glue that tailpiece on too. I don't really have to worry. This part is, right now, is not a critical part of this. As soon as you're done with this tool, notice what I've written on here. Sharp. And so that the blade edge that's sticking down, you don't wind up chopping your finger off. Because we're going to use this over and over again, I can just put this with the cutting tools. You can do what I did. I just ran a pen in there so I can see the marks. And I use a master ass screw plane, and I'm just going to carefully plane down until almost all of those marks are done, and then the last little bit I'll take out with a sanding block. To get good efficiency out of these planes, you need to replace the blade on a regular basis, and never, if possible, never hold the blade at 90 degrees. At a 45-degree angle, it'll take about a 1/64 of an inch cut, and you can see very quickly that I can make a nice removal of material and a nice straight line. I won't get a lot of dips and doodles. And what's going to happen sooner or later, I won't be able to see the lines. As I see I'm coming up on the last little bit of line, then I'll switch over to a sanding block. See some of them, I'm not going to go all the way, but what you can see is you'll come up on the end of it, all of a sudden that line is, you'll take one more cut and the line disappears. You could even leave a faint tracing of a line on and do the last little bit with sandpaper. Now when I come around, see the edge? I want to work that edge now. Now I'm up to the edge, that's about where I want to be, right there. And the rest, just get some 240 grit on a block, dust it right off, that'll be ready to go. All right, we're ready to do the sanding on this part. You can see it's kind of got that octagon shape. Now one exception that I've found works well is up in the nose I've left extra material because we're going to do an inner shell on this. A couple little extra pieces. I'd like to have a little extra material up by the nose. That's always a problem if you make it too small, so rather than get too cute here, everything else I have all the lines removed though. They've just kind of drifted into the front, and I found that to be a good way to do it. We're trimmed right up to the point at which we anticipate that this is going to be, and that should give us a nice, now a nice thing is, you know, if anybody's building a similar plane to Miss Ashley or a Miss Ashley, you can call up and say, hey Wendy, thanks for doing all the carving, make me a shell. I wish I could call up and get a shell. Part usually goes relatively quickly. Some of that sticky back 240. You know, I just see the hint of a line there, so I know I'm in a kind of a high spot there. I give it a couple more swipes. Whoops, line disappears. That's it. And I can be pretty sure I've taken off close to the amount of material that I want. Once you've figured out how to do this once, you only, believe me, not many people do this and then go off and carve blocks the next time and the next time. Unless you have some real compelling reason to carve blocks that you, first off, you have to pay for them. And nice blocks are usually over 10 bucks a piece, maybe even more. They're impossible to get. But good sheeting, good A-grain sheeting, usually no problem at all to get 4 to 6 pound sheeting. Now it would be nice if everybody that ever designed a plane had molds for them. So if let's say you want to make a Thunderbird, you call up somebody that made a Thunderbird and say, run me off a couple of shells here. How nice that would be. Somebody's making a Nobler. Well, we already have Nobler stuff, but Seafires, all the people that have made Seafires and Spitfires, then we've provided the shells to them. Percy Hatfield has 2 under construction right now, so think of how much carbon and sanding that saved him. You only have to do the molds once. That's the nice part. Things I always emphasize to people, when you're doing a carving or a shaping job, not to use your eyes, use your hands. Now what I'm doing, and I don't know, maybe other people can't do it, but I can. I can feel a spot that isn't right here. Right here I can feel it's bigger on one side than the other. Well, now you want to do the final shaping in this motion. Going on about a 45-degree bias, that gets rid of all the little sanding scratches and little sanding marks and leaves a nice finish on it. Even though we don't really need that nice finish, it's just nice because this mold is going to get put to use over and over again. I'd like to have that finish relatively nice anyway. I look from the top, it looks like, again, see, I may have taken just a little bit too much off here, maybe, but I can always slide that up and it'll get thicker and thicker. That's why I left that material on there. And I've got about, well, a close amount to what I want. And toward the back here, once that's 1/8 of an inch thicker, I think that's going to be real usable. Now the next part is going to be to take this piece, get some scrap, doesn't even matter, 1/2, 3/4 inch, glue this base plate right down, nice and solid, and get the parting wire in there. And that little parting wire is my little personal invention. I'll take full credit for it, even though probably somebody else has done it first. What I tried to do is pick out 2 really ratty pieces of wood from the pile. This one's really junk. This is the stuff you can even hear it. I usually give these to George for his RC projects. Anyway, what we want to do, I've radiused this edge, just hit it with a piece of sandpaper so I have a little indentation for the wire. Now what makes this possible, and why in the beginning of molding these parts I had difficulty anyway trying to come up with a system, was because you could never, after the shell is made, you could never get this edge just right. Well, now what I do is I CA in a thin piece of wire. The wire picks up in the impression of the mold and I can trim it right off of that wire. It also allows me to, if I want to have a bigger shell, I can lay 1/8 inch tape along that and I can make the shell 1/8 of an inch higher, or I can make it 1/8 of an inch. I mean, I have an infinite amount of flexibility to bring this up or down to suit the model. So what I'm going to do now, just glue this, a permanent glue joint, right down, and that's the next step here, is to get this all joined up. In fact, I can saw this piece off ahead of time. Next thing is, I have this tack glued on here, and the number one thing that I don't want to have is a banana. I want to make sure that no matter what, I'm as flat as possible before I run a glue seam down this whole end. And I want to really ensure that this is nice and straight, because again, the parting line is what I'm interested in more than anything else. Okay. Next step on this is going to be to go over to the bandsaw and make or the jigsaw. Do this on a jigsaw, it's only a 1-inch block. Make a 90-degree cut, so where this shell ends, it goes straight down. And then the perfect outline here, and I want to do that real slow with a brand new blade so I get a nice neat cut. This little notch, sometimes in sanding this out, it kind of gets soft. A good way to do this is take a ballpoint pen, even if it has no ink, which most of mine absolutely refuse to write. Talk about a great invention. If you could come up with a pen that would write on wood. Now the purpose of this is that not only by leaving an ink impression in there, it lets you find a place you're going to seat that wire in, and then we're going to CA that wire right in. Now, an easy way to get the wire on, again, you need to put a splice in the back, of course. An easy way is just press it in, because it's soft ball, so it's probably going to go right in. Tape it in place first at about, some reasonable intervals. And if you kind of run that wire right down in that notch, remember, this is the key part to this. My own little invention. Not many things I've invented, but this is one of them. Anyway, just run it right down. I think you can figure the rest out. Then we'll CA in between the joints. And then from in between the joints, first time I did this, I tried to glue it on and hold it, and I glued my fingers to the mold, I glued my nose to the mold. It's unbelievable. Anyway, where we run out of wire, we'll have to put an extra little piece. The part you really want to make sure you have nice and tight is the front, because that's where the wire tends to want to spring out. Again, just a couple of tacks. Try never to get my hand around. Oh, I always wind up gluing my hand to the part. I know that doesn't happen to you. If you're a professional, you don't do that. Anyway, once this sets up, the next step is going to be to take the tape off and then put some CA down in the spots where the tape is. And this will, in essence, be our plug. We'll be ready actually 5 minutes out. In fact, I'm going to have a cup of coffee and then we're going to wrap this sheet right up. We'll get a sheet, an appropriate sheet for this. It must be A-grain. And the key thing here is it must be A-grain wood and very soft and bendable. 4 to 6 pound piece is nice, but it doesn't have to be. If you have 8-pound wood, use 3/32. You really don't have, but what I found is doing 3/32, you don't have a lot of room for sanding in the corner, so I'd rather do 1/8. It gives me a lot of room to do the sanding in. Just safe on my part, it's a safety factor. So the next thing, once that's glued in, is get rid of all the tape. And then if any CA runs up onto the mold, just clean it off. This green tape, by the way, has been quite a find. It's got just the right tack. I like it. We'll be using this when we go to do the finish for sure. I always try to do is at the end where the wires come together, just put some tape on them. It's good that you don't even have the ability of this to pop, because we're going to get this soaking wet with ammonia. Up here it wouldn't hurt to do the same thing. I don't think so. I don't think I even have to do it because this is rock solid right now. But anyway, after you use a mold like this 4 or 5 times, what happens? That tends to loosen up. Now the next thing is I want to go carefully along this seam with a sanding block so that I don't have any rough edges. See up here, this one piece of wire is already popping out a little bit. I don't want to have a blister or a bubble or something that's going to show up in the final mold. So I'll dress that off, and then this is ready to actually run our first part on. Again, I've had the best luck with these back cut blocks that Bob Martens has made. getting in that little wire relief. And this is the final thing, and we're ready to go pick out some sheeting. Again, if you have to put a joint in the sheeting because you don't have, it's hard to put a joint in the length of the sheeting, but you can always put a joint if a 4-inch piece doesn't wrap around. Get the joint as close to the edge as possible. It's better to have a joint down around the edge than right down the middle. I've never had good luck getting joints right down the middle. This thing, I have the sandpaper glued right to the table. This will show me any real high spots or any edges that I haven't really. I'm doing this very gently because I want to see if it's going to pick up any high spots. Now it looks pretty good. We're pretty much ready to use this guy. Now you should be able to, if you make the mold carefully, use this on pretty much almost every plane you're ever going to make, or some variation of it, and you never have to buy any more blocks. And the main thing is the grain of the wood. When you make a mold, goes in the right direction. You don't have this wasted grain that's like, they're not adding anything to the strength of the plane. It's ready to use. Next step is to go through all our wood. And in this case, we'd like to find a nice piece of A grain. The number one criteria for this wood is going to be that it's A grain. We have some nice 4-inch stuff here. I'm going to weigh it up. Again, I don't really need the lightest piece. What I need is an A grain piece that has real nice grain quality. Grain quality meaning the grain going right down the middle. Not a C grain piece. No C grain here. But I have to compromise here. I don't have any piece in the 48-inch range wood that's suitable. So what I'm going to do, since I'm not going to use this, in other words, I'm only going to use this much of the mold to begin with. The other piece can be separate. I can actually mold this in 2 pieces. See, I only need to go up to where the tail comes off, and then I'm all set. So what I'm going to do is just go through. Now it changes to all I really need is 4-inch wide wood, and I can go through these pieces and pick out something with some nice grain. With 3 really nice pieces that weigh 18 grams each, for 4 by 36, that's decent weight. Now I'm looking for, this is what I'm trying to get. These are all good, and they're all super A grain. I had some 16 grams, but they weren't A grain. All 3 of these will be fine. I'll be able to get 3 shells out of this, and I'm going to need one. I'm going to need one for the other plug, so I want to have them made out of, actually for the other one, I really don't even need a good piece of wood, but it's not going to hurt to have it. Now I'll look at which one has the straightest grain. We'll pick this one. This will be for the model, the part that we're actually going to use. Now the next step, you have a lot of choices here. I'm wearing rubber gloves because I got all these cuts all over my hand from work. But one of the choices you have, you can use straight ammonia, or you can use sudsy ammonia. Or you can just use water if you really, this is not pleasant smelling stuff, but I'm trying to do this while Karen's not in the house. If Karen was here, I would just use water. And you want to obviously try not to breathe too much of this. You need to really lay it on, let it soak a good 5 minutes. The more you can put on there, the better. Soaking in, you can start getting it to work in that direction. If you've watched that Al Rabe video, or seen the excerpts I've put on a tape, he's the master of making these balsa shells, and his are a lot more complex than these. See, the nice thing about these are usable in ordinary, nobler, oriental, any average plane. You don't have to have a special Spitfire or something to use shells. I just like to give this about 5 minutes of just working the material before I put the ace bandage on. Now, there's 2 types of ace bandage. The one that sticks to itself. See, even if I didn't have a mold, I almost have some of this done. But there's the one that sticks to itself and the one that doesn't stick. The one that sticks to itself is by far the better of the 2. And as that starts to soak in, you can see it almost makes its form without a mold. Now what'll help line this up is some surgical pins just randomly placed, so you keep this right in the center. Usually 4 or 5 of these will work well. And as we get to the back, I can trim off any extra. The best I've found is the bandages. See how it sticks to itself? These are normally, any drugstore has these. They're not hard to find. I like to start a couple inches back from the nose, right about at the first pin, in fact, and I don't have to worry about. Hey, you don't have to get this on, you know, like Hercules or anything, but the more pressure you can put on, up to a point, you'll get the shell to start conforming down. And just like wrapping a mummy here, now that I have the front, now I can go to work. Take one pin at a time out. Now I can start applying some pressure. Now sometimes it leaves little indentations in the wood. Not to worry, they sand right out. Try to get as few wrinkles in this as possible. It's a good idea to have 2 or 3 of these in stock. They're not expensive, only a couple of dollars each. Because a lot of times you get to the end of a mold and you need another one, which looks like the case we're going to wind up here because it's a wide piece. Now as I get to that pin, right here I'm at that pin, I can just kind of help that conform a little bit. But the whole trick that makes this work is the wire. Without the wire, if you just had that shell, that part, it'd be real difficult finding a, first of all, it'd want to bend and bow and everything. You need that base plate and you need that little piece. That little indentation for the wire. That's the real critical part of this that I've found anyway. And it's the part of it that allows virtually anybody to do this. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to use shells. Now, I get to the end of the first bandage, take one pin out, put the pin back in. Now I can get the second one. Now, if you put this up by a heating vent, which we're going to do, you'll find out it'll dry in a couple hours, but it's best to leave it a day or so. And it's best not to make the shells ahead of time until you're a couple of days away from using them. In our case, that's not really practical because we can always make more if we need them. But if you were only making one model and no second fuse, you'd like to make the shell and the next day glue it on a plane if possible, or say within the shortest practical amount of time, because the wood in time wants to go back to its original shape, and I have a little jig that holds it in place while it's drying over time, and we'll try to show that up. Worked well on the Spitfire series. Anyway, if you get this, the first time you do this, it might be a little awkward or you're for some reason uncomfortable. Once you do this once or twice, you pretty much can do it in your sleeve. We're going to cut this whole back piece off anyway. But now with the bandage that's left, I can just rewrap it. Just go back over it. Mr. Mummy here. Go right around that pin. And then the last step is kind of the part that maybe if you leave it out it wouldn't even matter, but I found it so it's not going to go around again. I found this to work real well. You wind up putting the same pins right back in. And now right at this point in time, you want to take about 5-10 minutes, especially up in the nose section. Just keep squeezing it down, because as that wood is drying out and it's conforming, if you've ever watched how they steam stringers on a wood boat, how they build wood boats, just keep squeezing it down. Give it about 5-10 minutes, and then we'll hang this up to dry. The more you can sit, if you're watching TV, like you just sit here and squeeze this, that would really help the wood to conform. This is, even though I've been pressing on it, it still needs a little more compression right up in the front. Duct tape is okay, electrical tape. In this case, we have this green masking tape that we're experimenting with. Let's just see how this works. Anything you can do. Al Rabe uses bed sheets. You probably could get away with using bed sheets if you didn't want to use this. Anyway, that's the nicest thing about this is, first off, this piece of wood sells for about $3 instead of $10. There's no carving and no hollowing. From this point in my life on, this mold will be producing parts for people in our club. Actually, people around the world. Anybody interested in making Miss Ashley? We can supply them with real right to the plans molds. It'll be really nice. The thing is, I take one of these hardware store eye hooks because I want to hang this by a heating vent. Just thread it into the base plate. Any kind of a hook is okay. It's only holding this piece of balsa wood. I've written on the back of it which mold this is because after a while, we have so many of them, they start to all look alike. In a couple of years, if you don't use one, you won't. Was that the bottom or the top, or Seafire or Spitfire or what? Anyway, this is now added to our arsenal of things that we have in the shop, and we're able to make parts on, geez, on a one-day notice. You can see by setting it up by a heating vent, that just ensures that this is going to cure off in a real short amount of time, but we're going to give it a couple days in a mold air. We have plenty of other things to work on while that's drying up. Now the next thing we're going to start thinking about is how we want to do the cowl, this bottom block. That's the next step in this, and we're going to think about that tonight, come back tomorrow, be ready to start carving this nose up. After spending another sleepless night thinking about how I want to do this. See, there's so many choices here. I originally was going to make, similar to a Strega cowling, have this piece attached to the model because it can only attach up to this point. Then this piece would be a separate, like a hatch, cowl, whatever. And I thought, well, I'm going to try, at least give it a fighting chance, is to try to make this piece that, this piece is going to be attached to the wing when it plugs in, to try to make this cowl and this piece right up to where the pipe would end at a one composite part. Now if that doesn't work, of course it's not a big deal, we can always cut it and attach pieces, but I'd like to be able to get in here is to make this kind of like a funny car where this whole piece came off, and I've made real sure that I've engineered up plenty of strength into this area, not tried to do this in a way where this is a big giant eggshell. So I'm going to take a real radical chance here that I'm going to be able to make this piece, go right over this whole thing, and then figure out how an appropriate way to hold it down is. And with the idea in mind, of course, if it really doesn't work, you know, we go to plan B, but we'll give this what I'll call the funny car cowling and see how that's going to work out. The thing I've thought about here before I take the engine out is I want to make sure that this bottom is going to have enough clearance around the pipe so I can engineer this piece of wood up, because I'd like to use, again, with the thought this might become a kit or plant, I don't want to have any odd size wood. It's a 1-inch block will cover that whole pipe tunnel, in theory anyway. It's good to think about. Anytime you can leave that molded part, that shell in a mold another couple of days, leave it. Don't take the bandages off. Leave it in the thing for a week if you have to, or you can. The longer you leave it in there, obviously, the better it's going to be. Now what I want to do, I want to set up the blocks for this. First part is going to be to try to get a block to go in here. A 1-inch block will do it? Yeah. Okay, and sand off. This ought to be fun. Again, we don't have to use up good wood because this is not going to be a real part. You can try to get this angle just about right. Real close anyway. Takes care of that angle. Now the next thing is to try to get this angle cut and ground in so we have that little corner piece, and then we can set this block attached to that. This little block is going to be a little bit of a pain to make, I can see that. This is what's nice, even this will be a fiberglass piece. Then I can use this fiberglass piece to carve the other cowling, the plug. So in essence, nothing will go to waste here. And the wood fuselage will have that, it's going to have a fiberglass cowling anyway, but it'll have a whole bottom piece there, assuming we can make this without a problem. Tech way to cut the block, I just tried to use my bandsaw and broke the blade. And of course, don't have a spare blade. Anyway, you can always do it a low-tech way, that's for sure. Now I'm going to have to trim this until this piece is flat, and I can do that on a belt sander without much of a problem at all. is get this to marry right up.
I'm trying to rough out all these blocks because they're all going to comprise, I'm going to have to glue them all together. And I can trim the outside, of course. Next thing, I guess I ought to put that half moon cut in that one. Okay, I've left that purposely oversized. Just looking at it right now. Now what I can do is tack glue all the blocks together and then trace the side of the fuselage around it and get that much taken off with the jigsaw. It's going to be quite a big piece, but like I said, if it doesn't work, we can cut it up, move it around. In some little reinforcements because this part of the fuselage is getting so thin. Little piece of 64th plywood, and I'll sand that in, and I'm ready to join the cowling blocks. Tip: when you want to sand inside a radius like this, I have that sticky back sandpaper, and it just lets you get right up in there with no big deal at all. The sticky back holds the paper to your hand, gives you an infinite amount of radiuses. It's a good little tip. Anytime you have to sand inside a shell, inside a cowling. Now this should get us ready. I want to make sure again that I have that angled block with that angle on it. Have a flat surface to work off. We're going to glue the blocks up. Got a little more reinforcement holding that nose ring on. Take a plywood front for this block so I can get a real accurate, this is one of the things I want to be real accurate in the mold, is this lay up against the nose ring. So this will give me something to work off that's got a relatively hard surface, and I can use this to carve and sand right into. I've also put a little angle on there so that in essence it fits right into that little groove. A nice tight fit and a good corner. This angled piece can go in here first. Oops. Again, I'm going to do everything with just tacks of glue until I'm happy with it. In fact, first I'm going to trace this out. Before I do anything is take this. Whoops, I could just tack glue this right in place. Now what I can do before I even tack glue this together is just remove this material. So just be less carving we have to do when we ultimately get to carve it. Okay, now what I can actually do here is just tack this right in place. A couple of tacks of glue. Okay, now I can get this surface nice and smooth and tack this piece in place. And get a rough idea of how much to remove off here, and this is ready to tack in place. Anything I could remove ahead of time, needless to say, just saves time in the overall carving. Yeah, just leave the line and plus a little bit on. Tack this in position. Now, as long as I'm going to be doing all this carving and matching and everything, I'm going to put the little block that's going to go back here. Then I can basically carve this whole section in one unit. I'm just going to trace this out, tack glue this on, and that'll pretty much end our session tonight. I'll be ready to carve, hollow, sand, whatever tomorrow. Looks like it's going to work out real well. Well, we're going to tack glue this up and then dream about a day of carving tomorrow. Profile of this, I want to have obviously the back of the pipe exit here. So I put the kink in here, and I just got to file that, get this angle in, because this is where this part will break from this part in the final piece. And it's just a question now of tacking everything up. Okay, tomorrow is carving day. Hey, I always like to start off fresh when I have this much material to remove, this much mess to make. Fill up the garbage cans with scrap tomorrow. So you're probably wondering, what's Wendy doing with Hanukkah candles and a Christmas tree in the same house? To that we reply, what do we call this, a bi-religious family? Multi-religious? There's something wrong with what we're doing here. I'm not sure what it is.
Nothing wrong. Two religions, that's all.
Two religions. Anyway, I'm sure I'm not the only one in the world that's blessed with having two religions. We get Hanukkah presents. We get Christmas presents in the same house at the same day, at the same time. It's almost like liking Tune Pipes and Tiger 60s at the same time. So needless to say, Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas at the same time from this bi-religious family. So there you have it. If you're confused, well, don't let it bother you. It's a Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah to everybody. Now we're taking a couple-day break from our normally working on this bottom block because we have a big wheel pan I wanted to fill. And I wanted to show one of these up close. These are really coming out nice. They have the recess in them. Real happy with the way these are selling. In the future we're going to be selling a nice supply of these on a regular basis. Now we all know who Ken Clapson is. World famous for making a tsunami that's nicer than the one Wendy made. Anyway, gotta tell you, he sends this letter. I whip it open and I look at this. Now look, I just look at this real quick. I didn't read the letter, and I thought, geez, what a workshop! Holy crow! I'm figuring, boy, just put the benches in and maybe get an O-gauge railroad going around here and plenty of room for Spitfire catalog. No, this is a hothouse for a greenhouse or something that they grow. Probably he's growing marijuana in this thing. Who the hell knows? But he sends this, and Ken, you really caught me off guard. I really thought this was his workshop. Then, of course, I flip it over, and I see it's 144 feet by 30 feet, and then I realize this is what he does for a living. Well, Ken, you know what? You should make a workshop like this. Put some heat in. Hey, you never have to worry about smelling a BRODAK dope in the house. You know the whole thing. Wife doesn't get sick from the fumes, none of that. I wanted to show this up because if you've never seen this before, this is a real hog. This is normally the kind of fiberglass they would use to make wheel pants. Well, you know what? Look at the difference. I've got some of this, it's ultra tight weave, and the idea is to get as much glass and as little resin into a part. Well, I laid up a couple of parts with one layer of this and one layer of this. They're just as strong, and of course the side that I like is they're much lighter. So we're working on improving these parts little by little. Now I'm ultimately going to try next time to put 2 layers of this and none of this, and just see maybe I need 3 layers of this, because obviously this is 3 ounce, this is 4 ounce. But if you look at the difference in quality, now the difference in price, needless to say, this is more expensive than this by a big amount too. But we're going to be working on some more testing of this now that we have 8 wheel pant molds we can work with every day. I expect to make some real progress on this in the near future. Well, the only thing I'm going to do today is unload the molds. But I want to get some idea of just how the parts with this crow's feet, well, this stuff looks great. It's got a really nice finish. It'll need a minimum amount of sand. You can see how thin it is. I can see my finger right through it. It's going to make for some really nice parts in the future after we decide on exactly how we want to do this. Of course, one of the things we're trying to do is come up with a wheel pant where the landing gear leg notches into this so it can't rotate. So that's one of the new things we're working on. Making progress little by little. Today is going to be a molding day, and then tomorrow we'll get back to working on the shop. Now what's really nice today, we've had this sitting in the wrap, the mummy wrap, for, hey, about a week anyway. Anyway, I want to make, obviously I need to make two of these. I'll make the other one exactly the same off camera, but I want to have two of them ready because we're closing in on a time that we're going to be able to make the molds for this. Now, one of the things that's different about what we're going to be doing now, and to tell you the truth, I haven't done it yet, so this is all new to me, but I'm going to really try like heck to put all the details on, is I've thought about how I want to do this, and I'm going to ultimately carve this up, maybe a little bit today, a little bit tomorrow. I need to do this in sessions because we're working all day, and I get about an hour or two in the morning, an hour or two at night, and then we play Christmas presents and wrap the tree and who knows what else. People coming over all the time. So I'll probably get it done in a lot of small sessions. But what I'm going to do with this bottom piece is after it's carved and sanded and finished, I'm going to make a hard mold. Now I haven't made a hard mold for this thing yet. For this type of part I've used all rubber molds because rubber molds are so easy to use. It's almost like you could make a rubber mold on your first try and get a perfect part. Hard molding is a little more difficult. You need draft angles and you need to certain other criteria for it. But the material just arrived from George Spar. We have some real high quality gel coat, some high quality resin. So the two next things is I'm going to lay up one of these parts, another one, get this one out of the shell. And then little by little, maybe a little bit in the morning, a little bit at night, get some of the carving done on that. But the preparation for it would be exactly the same as if we were making a rubber mold, but we're going to make a hard mold. It's called a hard shell mold. Now the reason that's real good is because that'll be kind of a little practice, go to school thing at making the actual fuselage part all in one piece when we get the very, very expensive resin and the carbon cloth that we really don't even know if Midgley's going to be able to get it yet at a discount. We may have to pay $90 a yard for it. We'll know within the next week or so, though. When I tell you, in all things in life, and it doesn't only mean these little molding jobs, all things in life, when you're going to do a big thing, it's always good to do a little practice, kind of a run through first. Now with this mold, I've thought about it long and hard as to how I want to do. We can't really do this the way you make an RC ship. And I want to have as few seams as possible. There's a lot of criteria. And it's taken me a lot longer than I really thought it would in the very beginning. I thought this was going to be make two shells, glue them together and be done. Not that easy. And like all things where you need to develop, the project has changed from minute to minute, day to day, every time I speak to somebody. I'm speaking to several people on the internet now, one of them from the Ukraine that seems very willing to share the information, another one from Canada. And so I'm looking forward to, hey, learning from them and sharing what I know. And obviously all of us will benefit in the end, but it's just very, very nice to come up with something that really is a benefit to the hobby. Now whenever you've made one of these shells, this is the nicest part of the whole thing. Now this wire popped, but that's not a factor right now. We can glue that right back. But if you look in here, you can see down the whole length of the part, the wire impression. Step in this is to get a pen line, and the pen line is only there because I have bad eyes, but it kind of gives you a guide point to run the knife down when you slit this. Now trimming a shell, you'd like to get, let me just show, you'd like to get that knife edge. You'd leave the pen line on, of course, but it's hard to get the blade to follow. Now one of the ways I've found that's a little bit better is by pressing your finger right against the blade. Let me just get this started. And of course, using a brand new blade and looking down, I just let me get my glasses. And try to follow the line, but leave the line on. And it's best to go nice and slow. Because as soon as we trim this one off, we can basically, and I'll do it off camera, repeat the whole process and make another shell. And the beauty of these shells is, now imagine if we just started right now this morning, we need to carve another one of these up. We go to the, whatever, the block of wood pile and try to find another 4 to 6 pound block. Yeah, sure. A lot of times you order 20 blocks, you don't even get one. But the idea is just to follow that line as closely as possible. Usually if you look real close, what will happen is the front little piece won't have exactly the right taper. So I'm going to lay pieces in here. Well, first I'm going to get like maybe 16th wood and lay a piece here, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. So it gives me a little more material to work with on the nose. Now I'm only going to do that on the part that actually is going to wind up on the wooden fuselage. The other one, it won't matter. I can put any material on there, and since we're not ever going to run an engine, it won't really matter. But it always needs a little reinforcement on that. And then we'll be ready to just put that over on the flat sanding block and get a true edge. Right now, as long as you've left the line on, you're totally safe. Really just a piece of scrap. Now, the reason I want to bevel the edge on it, as I work my way up toward the nose, I want to have a little bevel on the parts, because I want to have no stress riser at all. This is one of the high stress areas of the plane. And the idea is that there's no spot where the wood just ends, like a step. It kind of tapers in. Now I can take this piece, lay this, which will ultimately just be the equivalent of a doubler in there. Now the best that I've found is to do this with thick CA, because it gives you a little time to get that curve put in. But this is one of the high stress areas that always seems to, on some models, seems to be a problem. As years go by, it always cracks or in some way deteriorates. Now I'm trying to hold that curve in position. As it dries, so it in effect it acts as a little former also. As soon as that dries, I'll run a little bead of thin CA back there and be ready to lay the next piece up and the next piece. Like 3 pieces is all you need here. Again, as I always like to do, whoops. So you got to be ready. You got to have the Q-tips ready. Always be ready, like a Boy Scout. Anyway, that seals that up. Now I'll just repeat that and get the other 2 pieces in. Okay, now of course the trick is to just cut this just a little bit oversized. This adds a lot of little strength up to the nose section, and then we'll take this over to the belt sander, the little belt we have glued to the table, and get a nice edge on it. Reinforcing the nose like this seems like it's really important when you come to doing a shell in 3/32, since this one is 1/8. I always like to leave a lot of little meat, a little extra meat, and I can do the final sanding, it won't be a problem. But if you make a 3/32 shell, you really don't have a lot of room for error, you don't have a lot of room for sand in the corners, and you really save just a few grains. It hardly seems worth it. I like to use nice 1/8 inch, if you can get a 4 to 6 pound piece, doesn't even have to be an ultra light piece. But this little reinforcing thing at the nose and get rid of the stress riser, that seems real important. All of the ships we've done this way have lasted a nice, without any cracking up here. You always can tell they crack right up here. Now the thing with this is I have the sandpaper glued right to the table, and I want to try to get an even pressure on it.
Just ordinary 220 sandpaper. The sticky back paper, this is where it really comes in handy. Always good to take just a little bit off at a time, because once we get to that wire, the line of that wire, and then we make another piece, I'll know pretty much that the two top blocks are going to be real similar. And obviously one of the goals we want is to have the top block on the carbon fuselage to be the same as on the wood fuselage. I don't want to have two completely different planes. We got one little spot right here. It's amazing. It only takes about 2 minutes to do this. Now it's real good if you have a friend. You can kind of get four hands on this. It's a lot better, but you certainly can live without it if that's... Oh yeah. Let me just look at this right now. Get little spots like this. This was a little spot that just got chewed up in the back. You can repair that by making a little cork, little draft angles, and just shove the piece in there. We'll sand this smooth. Now, the idea is to sand as much of this on the mandrel as possible. Of course, up in the front here, that's not possible. But in the back, by having the original mold, I can leave this hanging off the front just a little bit, and this kind of gives it support. I just want to dress this off very lightly now. That any little imperfections that are in here, and it looks like, sometimes from the wrapping, let's see if I can find one up here. You'll see there's little dimples and wrinkles and whatever. Here's one right here. You want to get that out. Let's see if we can get that up on a close-up. Easy to do. Some nice 400 sandpaper or 320 and just get a nice surface, but do it while it's on the mandrel, except for the last little bit up here. And this part is reinforced anyway. Anytime you sand shells, you'd like to do it on the mandrel if possible. Now see how nice that lines up with that wire, how that wire does its job? It's a great little invention. Again, I need to let that sit out. Any little spots on here that are rough, it doesn't take much sanding, and I don't want to make this any thinner than it is until it's permanently glued in place, and then I'll put the final cuts and curves in it around the edges. And then of course the last little thing is to true up the nose ring, make sure that fits. And if it's on the small side, what we're going to do is just trim a little bit off and move this forward. That's why we made it oversized. And if it's too large, I can space it back and just add a layer of balsa. In other words, make the nose ring just a little bit thicker. Now, little by little, it's starting to shape up. And once you have these shells made, it's so nice. I mean, you look at them and you know, anytime you want another one, now imagine if you were carving this top block for this plane, you're looking at maybe 4 or 5, maybe more hours. When you're looking at this, you're looking at to make a copy of this fuselage, or if this were ever to go to plans or a kit, and you wanted those shells made for you, as Percy Adfield or any of the other people that have made Spitfires, bingo! A couple hours, you've got them. Tell you, every time I do this, and it doesn't matter how often I do it, I've done it enough times now to I'm getting sick of doing it, but I just keep thinking about that big block of wood and all that carving. And actually, when I'm done with this, I'm going to do a little bit of carving and getting a rough shape on that, because I got to get to work soon. One of the projects that we've been working on lately is at our club field. We've been taking a load of stone up there every day or so and trying to fill in what has become a real problem in the parking area. And it's the kind of work you don't want to do when the real winter sets in, when there's snow on the ground and everything. Anyway, I just love doing this. Once these parts are made, I mean, I always just get that feeling that, wow, I've just beat the whole system again. Let me get the pins. Absolutely something that The first time you do this, I don't know of anybody that's ever done this and gone back to using blocks. Maybe somebody. And I love that Al Rabe footage. He seems to make good use of sheeting too. And you always get the strength going. The thing is, you get the strength in the right direction when you do this.
And in a matter of about 15-20 minutes, another top block is sitting in the oven here, waiting to hatch.
Good idea, since we're not going to use this shell right away, to take a piece of scrap wood. And what I want to do is trace out the shell. What I'm going to make is a little storage jig for storing these shells, which we can use over and over again. And I'll strip off again a piece of scrap wood, go right down the edge of this, because what will happen if you leave this for a week, we don't know if we're going to, because of Christmas holidays and having to work at the club field every day, but what's going to happen, this is going to want to go back little by little by little, and I don't want to lose this shape. So by making a little fixture, it'll just hold this pinch in it. It'll make it that I can store it until exactly the time I need it. Let me get the phone. I can do, just tack the front end. Once that dries, I want to bend this, so I just maintain that outline, work my way right down the part, let that piece dry, move this piece, come right up to the line, be real careful to get it right on the line, and this jig actually then can go with the mold as its own storage jig. And once that piece is effectively there, it's no big deal. You just snap the part in. And that keeps it from spreading out. It just acts like a little fixture as time goes by, because we don't really know when exactly we're going to use this. I always like to mark which one it is, because I have several of these in the shop. And obviously this is, as long as we need to store these, this will be a handy little tool to have. It takes 5 minutes to make, and you have it forever. Okay, I'm only going to have a little time to carve here in this session, but a good idea, if you've never done this, is to lay a blanket down on the table, do most of your rough carving right over the blanket. Then we could pick the whole blanket up and take it outside and throw it in the neighbor's yard. Yeah, as if he won't know. No, seriously, that is one of the ways of doing it. So, again, for the rough carving, I've found this Gerald Champ's knife to be real handy. For fine carving, I still like a 26 blade just a little bit better. And I'll start by just, again, time is really limited here, just taking off the corners and edges, all the big heavy stuff, with the fillet knife. And it's funny, every time I use this, I look over at the fish tank and the fish are going, oh, he's using a fillet knife again. So Gerald, you're ruining my fish's Christmas here. Anyway, there's no real secret that I know of to carving things other than to just, now I know I'm not going to get to do this in one session. I'm going to try to do half of it, a third of it, or whatever. Basically, one of the jobs we've been working on up at the club field is trying to fill in the driveway with some stone that we've gotten through our construction work for free. So by filling in these holes now before the real ground freezes, it'll make next summer's days at the field, I guess is the right word, a lot more pleasant. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see if we're going to be able to mold this. I'm hoping, once this is carved, I'm hoping I'm going to be able to mold this whole thing so the whole thing comes off like a funny car. I guess we'll find out. Any tricks here other than just try to remove all the areas, all the corners, work our way into where we have a round. Always use your hand to hold it in. Uh-oh, I hear the door ringing. It must be Mike. Ready to go to work? Oh, look at this. Look at this. He even brought coffee. Ready to go to work. I guess we don't get to carve this today. Well,
I got 1 ton.
1 ton? Good. Let's go. 3/4 inch stone? Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that'll be fine. All right. You see why we don't get anything carved?
Notice this high-tech sides I put on here?
Yes, yes. SIG plywood.
Light ply.
Now, anybody that's never done an honest day's work, they can figure out why I'm in such great physical shape.
Front wheel.
Oh, man. This is real work, my friend. I'll tell you, let's get ready to do some carving here.
There is nothing even close on the whole planet to working with Mike. Mike is just absolutely the ultimate workaholic. And we started out, we were going to do like an hour's work. I thought we'd be done in an hour or two. Whole day shot. Anyway, there's a method to my madness. Come home, take a hot shower, have a big giant cup of coffee, and you know what? We're going to get some carving done tonight, whether Mike likes it or not. Anyway, if you ever want to get in the best shape of your life, it's real easy. Don't join a gym. Find a local mason and just become his helper. Shoveling stones and mixing cement, there's nothing better in the whole world. If you want to have big muscles and look like a footballer, mix cement. You know, it's funny. I get 10 things carved and Mike shows up. Yeah, now I like to get a little session in before work, a little session after work, but this is ridiculous. Anyway, I forget what I even put on tape this morning. Yeah, I'm lost. Anyway, I'm going to using the Gerald Champ fillet knife, get all the rough corners off of this. We know we're going to need big amounts of stuff off here and here and here, and I'm probably not going to get this done in one session. I want to get this whole thing to where I'm happy with the outer part of the shell. One of the things I've been trying little by little by little, I've switched over to the thinner knife because I want to start removing less and less material. The fillet knife is used just to get big giant amounts off. And as I start to round things like the scoop, I just want to take thinner and thinner shavings off. This is one good trick if you're not used to using this blade, is to hold your thumb on it. And I'll try to do this. I don't know why. I just seem to have a relatively good feel for carving. Again, we're not using good blocks on this. These are not our good blocks for the simple reason there's no point wasting them on something we're just going to use to make a mold. Now, that it's real important to know, you see how I'm leaving on the last little bit of material? I'm not getting that right down to its last little amount because I want to have some little extra to sand in. And as this piece comes up, since this piece is going to be removable, I want this to be a nice even parting line. I don't want to have that in the middle of a curved surface. Now, one way to do this to avoid going to the last little bit is just to carve using a little piece of tape. Let me get that phone. Using a little piece of tape for a reference. Now, what I try to do is I pull this shape off of the original Spitfire cowling as being roughly what I want, but of course I may have to build it up or change it. I want to get this radius real nice if possible. Again, what I found with the fillet knife, it's good for big rough cuts, but on razor cuts like this, because the blade is physically thicker, it just wants to take a bigger cut out each time. Now the thing is, I'm trying to get up even with this, but not take the last little bit off. And it's going to be a relatively close fit. Now, two things I'm buying by having this bottom piece and or cowling made out of fiberglass is I can get more cooling air around the engine. And if you remember back on the old Spitfire video from last year, the heat from the pipe burned the paint around here and I had to wind up adding vents and cooling vents and everything. Well, by having it made out of fiberglass, I've gained about 1/8 or more inch of room on each side of it. So I should, in theory, have a little bit more cooling air around that exhaust system. Now, the only real help I've ever found in trying to help people learn how to carve is to do it slow. It seems like I never can do it in one session. I like to just, I don't know, carving's very relaxing for me, so I tend to just get a cup of coffee going, relax, put some good video on or something, and just
The slower you can do it, feel with your hand. Don't try to do it by eye. I know this is going to be a complex opening in the final part. I'm going to try to really replicate that NASCAR, I should say, type of scoop. And again, I don't know how much I'm going to want to change this until I hollow out the engine part. I know I'm going to want to get up here. There's no substitute for just taking your time when you're carving. Small little pieces. When you try to lop off big giant amounts, it gets frustrating. And I know this cowl opening shape on Strega, on Spitfire, and on probably every plane that I've ever used it on has worked well, as well as on obviously some planes that have had it before that. Stiletto, for one, comes out as one of the obvious ones. I think Bob Hunt's Genesis was similar to that, I'm not sure. But the Stiletto, I remember, was very much like that, and very, very efficient, lets you choke the engine. Again, not many substitutes for just taking your time until this all starts to shape up. We've got a lot of carving to do, and I'll try to get some of it done off camera, of course. Now it's little by little starting to come into the shape that I'm striving for, but I always try to get one side almost the way I want it and then try to mirror image it by using my hand. Your hand is always going to be a better test of if it's not symmetrical. Spending a lot of time on the back part here trying to get this curve that comes in here, although I don't know how successful that's going to be. When I look at the real plane, that really does have a nice symmetrical curve, and that little door that's in the back might be a way we could exit the pipe. The pipe exhaust could come out there. It's real important down at the back here. This is where it really starts getting thin, and I want to maintain that angle to make it as, well, as scale-like as possible. Even though this is not going to be as scale as Gerald Shamps, it's still going to have what I hope is going to be most of the flavor, and a lot of it's going to come from this back of this scoop area. Just time-consuming, and it's the kind of stuff I like to do. I like to relax. I don't try to do it all in one session. I like to do a little bit in a session and work on something else. Don't get bored with it and try to rush it. But it's this back here that really takes a lot of time to get that blend in there. You have to be so careful about this piece and getting this piece exactly accurate up here, is because we're going to use the molded piece, the piece that's made from composite, on the wood plug, so that these two parts, when they're ultimately both molded on the fiberglass version, on the composite version, they need to match. One can't be. So the first step in this whole thing is to get this one exactly accurate and get an exact, accurate molded part of it. So I'm trying to maintain this line, trying to get this curve, this little radius up here before I even hollow this out and see if the motor fits. A lot of times you finish this and the motor doesn't fit. Or the head is back here or something. The point where this is starting to get rounded, I like to use my hand to feel which side is bigger than which side. And this transition part, now this is really going to be a difficult, and I need to get out the photos I have of this area. This is not like on a normal P-51. This has this really unusual looking scoop.
When I asked him why he felt so happy, Johnny chuckled with glee. He winked his eyes, said the scoop lies. What happened to me? I got the guy who used to be my captain, working.
Any carving job, I go back to this over and over again, and I keep trying to figure out which side is the high side. In this case, this is the high spot. You develop a feel for that in time. I don't know if I'm sure Michelangelo or somebody like that is born with it, but average people like myself, you just need to develop it. And just imagine it's like
setting a piece of sheetrock in place, and I'm sure most people have done that, is you look for the hard spot. Oh, right there. And I can almost do it, you can do it about 50% by eye, but the last little bit, you've got to do by feeling it. And the way this is working out, I'm not going to get a whole lot more done here. Basically, because I'm falling asleep from shoveling all those stones today. Good old masonry. Boy, I hate masonry work. I love getting paid, though. That's the problem. Anyway, hate working for free. That's the thing I hate. Anyway, if we get most of this carved off today, and we can... Another nice little thing is I got a neighbor down the street that basically complains about everything. Every time I run a model airplane motor or something, he moans and groans. And when I'm done with this, you can see what the blanket looks like. What I'm going to do is go down to his front porch, ring the bell, wish him Merry Christmas, and dump this on his front porch. That's what I feel like doing. I'm not really going to do it. I was out there running a motor the other day, and he comes over and complains, "What kind of noise? What's that noise? What's that noise?" I don't know. Some people just don't have a sense of humor. That's the whole problem. Man needs a life. Now this is another thing, is carve it into a seam. The seam will always be harder than the wood around it. So I try not to carve up to the seam. I try to carve right through the seam. Let the knife go right through the seam, catching both ends at the same time. And about halfway through this, I'll even take the luxury of putting a new blade in here. And the final little thing, I don't know if we're even going to need it, would be that it's hard to do a curved area with a plane. That little master air screw plane seems to work good on straights, but not real well on curves. Got a high spot here. And then I need to get out those pictures that show how the scoop really is on the real airplane. I'd like it to be as scale as possible. Again, we're not making a scale model. You don't want to, at least I can't. I can't, you know, get into the league where Al Rabe is, where the fuselage is almost dead scale, but I know these planes appeal to an awful lot of people, and they're doable, especially once the molds are all made. It's almost more doable than a Magnum or a Nobler or whatever. Anyway, I can see right now all this labor of love here that I put into this. Still going to need some work down here. The part I've had the most difficulty simulating is this transition where it goes from a pretty round surface to an almost, not really square, but almost square. This area back here is a lot more complicated than I thought it would be. But again, the key here is I'm trying absolutely not to rush this. I'm willing to put in as many sessions as I have to before I even hit this with sandpaper. Just constantly taking little shavings away like this and trying to leave that line. Most of all, leave that line so the part is just a little bit oversized. Even in the back here, I want to be real careful I'm not taking that last little bit off. Again, the whole trick, small ice shavings. I call them ice shavings. Get these blends. The minute the knife gouges in and you take a big chunk, you're going to wind up doing more filling than necessary.
How about aerobic shoes? Do you have the new Nike Air Elite Max?
What for? What you need is a good high-tech carpooling shoe.
What you need is Lady Foot Locker, where you'll find the largest selection of Nikes anywhere, including the new Nikes for running, walking, aerobics, and cross-training. The new Nike Air Huarache, Air Elite Max, and Air Cross Trainer Low. Lady Foot Locker has them. And at Lady Foot Locker, you'll get respect, expertise, and understanding. Because Lady Foot Locker is the only athletic footwear and apparel store designed exclusively for women. So come on down and see the latest in Nike shoes and apparel at Lady Foot Locker. Just do it. Mo, have you been a good boy this year?
I don't get many complaints, you know what I mean?
Good. Ask Santa for a brain.
Anyway, a couple of the things that are worth mentioning. You notice as I'm
doing these ice shavings, I'm not doing this. I'm dragging the knife down. See, when you want to get into ice shaving, and I'll use that for lack of a better word. See, I should have went to college. But anyway, I'm dragging the knife down as I'm carving, and I'm able to get off these little, very, very paper-thin little slivers. And I'm using my hand every step of the way. Here's a high spot right here. Now here we have to go in the other direction because of the grain. But I'm moving the knife. If you just push the knife forward, notice how the knife is going up. You can get little ice shavings. And I'll get this to the point where there'll only be one or two little places that I really can't get that I'm happy with, and I'll do that with a sanding block. But basically I'll get it almost to the point where it's ready to sand. I might even get it in this session. Just getting ice shavings. It just takes a lot of time to do this. But since we're going to be using this, and obviously another thing too is we might use this whole fuselage for a plane other than Miss Ashley, some other Reno air racer. All we'd have to do is cut this off and, you know, redo the scoop a little bit, and we'd have some other variation of a Reno air racer. Well, the only thing left now is the cleanup. Well, we're about at the point where I won't need to carve anymore here. All of the carving is done. And we're at the end of this session, so I'm going to try to get back nice and fresh tomorrow. Hopefully Mike won't come over so early. And I'll be able to get that all sanded out and prepped. Now, for the last couple of years, John Pothier has been supplying me with these razor-sharp pins. And believe me, these are razor-sharp. And I asked him to send me a catalog. And boy, if you stick one of these under your fingernail, you're really never going to order another one, that's for sure. Anyway, these are great. I see some other ones down here. Now, this is the Hobby Lobby catalog. Let me flip this up. Where's their phone number? I used to have one of these. Of course, I don't anymore. Somebody borrowed it. Here's their number, and I would suggest, and their website, obviously, give them a call. This is just one of many items that we use in the shop every day, and I find it to be very useful. The pins especially. This is just the handiest of pins. They don't split the wood or anything. And these, I'm gonna order some of these in the near future. I want to try these that will look like they have lollipops on the end, just as a little nitpicking checks modelers. Definitely like to try some of them. Anyway, this is just one of many items John has turned me on to over the years. Now, this is another thing he's suggested I check out, and I will order one of these. This planer, I have the master. I could have used this today. See how on top of things I am. Anyway, these things are both on page 67. If anybody's interested, obviously it's catalog 33, and I've dealt with these people before. It's no problem getting stuff from them. Good little items you need to keep your workshop rolling. John also sent along a general drill gauge, and this is one handy thing. This is something I haven't had in the past. And what it is, you can just take a drill. When you want to know what number it is, you just go down a row until it fits in the hole, and it has the number and the diameter in thousandths. It's a real high precision thing. A real nice little addition to the shop, I might add. But hey, I got to show you the biggest thing of all. Now this is, you know, the thing we've had in the past. Made out of plywood and balsa wood, and actually it works. I shouldn't really laugh. This is, Bob Martens made this up, and it has served the purpose over the years. We've used it many times on various jobs. It's a height gauge. But now look at this. This is one I think is just extremely, extremely nice to use. Look at this. Now the only thing I would do, if this were mine, I'd make this like a razor blade so you could constantly cut yourself on it. Anyway, these are great gifts, great additions to the shop. Now all I need, I'm laughing, but it's not going to be more than a couple of weeks, and we're going to be trying to line up the wing and the fuselage on the carbon fuselage, and we're going to need a height gauge, and obviously we'll be using this one, that's for sure. Anyway, thanks to John. And one of the things I want to say over and over again, and John is just one of many special friends I have in the hobby, that we share things we learn, we share things, tools. I mean, sometimes we don't get the stuff back, and I'm probably guilty of that as much as anybody. But I think if you have a hobby and you're not sharing it, or if you're just living on a desert island all by yourself and keeping everything a secret, I just get a feeling you miss a lot of the fun. And I've certainly had a lot of fun. All the people I count as on my A team, John is certainly one. And we really do enjoy even the development of stuff like this molded fuselage plane. We're really enjoying it. In today's mail, I just want people to be aware of what we're doing. Bob Brookins, we're trying to make our own personal color of BRODAK dope. Let me turn my high intensity light on here. Just let me give you an idea of how this is. I believe this is the Porsche color. Porsche PBC 72060 guards red. Now what I'm trying to talk John BRODAK into doing is making this one of his colors. Obviously we're going to find out if this is compatible with BRODAK dope, or if we can mix it, or we can buy the pigment, or whatever, but this for sure. And I just want to, this is a unbelievably red. This is from Bob Brookins, who has offered to help us, and we're certainly going to accept his help gladly. He had that real great plane Showtime. This is an even redder red, and he left the number. And what I'm thinking of doing when it comes time to, this might be toner by itself. I'm not sure if this is toner. I'll have to call him. But anyway, we're going to mix our own, and I hope it's going to be known. Now listen, when John BRODAK sees this video, when this real red comes out, if it comes out, I want it to be known as Miss Ashley Red, you know, not Porsche Red or something. I want a little credit here. Miss Ashley Red, coming soon to a theater near you. Hey, yesterday we did most of this carving, and it looks like we did a fairly decent job. What I always like to do is when you come back to a project after you've worked on it, redo the whole thing with your hand to try to find any high spots, because it's always best to get rid of high spots with your bare hand, not with a sanding tool. Anyway, I just want to smooth this. Now you can see, let me show this up close. It still has virtually all of the carving marks on it. And the sander will take most of them out, and then I'll do obviously the last little bit by hand. Last little bit, obviously a hand sanding job to get the last little bit of that smooth and dress off the edge. Now I'm going right up to the tape, shaving the edge of the tape, but I don't want to sand it away. Usually the hardest area to get smooth on a part like this is the transition around a canopy or whatever. So in here we're going to try to probably make up some sanding blocks with a little bit of a curve, or sometimes you can use a jar, something round to get that curve to blend in real nice.
always using your hand to find any of the high spots. The rough spot right there. Feels like a little high spot right there. This is the part of it that really is just getting very time consuming, and I'm getting very, very fussy about getting this, because eventually we'll be carving that NASCAR type of scoop in here. But I'm not going to mold it in. It'll be easier to mold, and I can get a thinner shell if I don't have to deal with that scoop opening. And then I can add it in later. And of course that allows me the choice of changing it, making it bigger and smaller on future parts. Now one of the things I do all the time is I take the paper off and see, put a new angle on it. This is a good tip, by the way. Because you're only really wearing out the edges. By now it's not even sticky back paper, it just about stays there, but I'm wearing all different edges into the sandpaper. Remember, this front piece is a complete, like a half moon, and it's blending into what almost is the shape of a canopy, a bubble canopy on the bottom. And I'm wondering if this side area is going to have some aerodynamic advantage. It certainly adds side area right at the spot where you want it the most. Again, this may prove to be a, well, like free lunch kind of thing. Now, this is another one of the blends. I'm sure I'm going to have to make some kind of little fillet up in here. But we're closing in on having this at least roughed out. Now, there's a lot of ways that people, and when you get to this point, obviously one of the things that, like the RC Jet guys do, is they cover the whole thing with fiberglass cloth. Well, I don't want to add any dimension to it. What I'm going to try to do is my own little way of doing it has been to just, once we get this piece off and final sanded, harden the whole thing up with thick CA. And this will pretty much, well, once we hollow it out, I'm going to need to see how that motor sits in there. You're getting that blend in there. That's a little bit, something that just takes a little time. And I want to get a little bit of a curve in there. Now we need to see if this height is right. If not, I can make our little ring. A nice thing about making a plug, if we don't like the way it looks, for whatever reason, before we can just carve another block. It won't be all that difficult to do that either. And then when we do the layup in fiberglass or in carbon, it'll have whatever shape we ultimately decide on here cast right in. Now, a little dowel is a good way to get in here. Notice what I'm doing is to twist. I'm accenting this, overdoing it, in other words, so you can get an idea. If you don't want to do that, you want to be twisting to create that reverse curve. And it's pretty much ready to pull this part off and then hollow it out for the motor, because I want to see if we're going to have a nice clean fit and plenty of air clearance in there. Any other changes I want to make to it at that time. Again, from this piece we could always just cut this piece off and make a cowling out of it, even after the part is laid up in a mold. So we'll have a lot of choice. Actually, with this plane we should have the most amount of choices that I've ever had. We can take the wing out. If the plane were to come out heavy, for instance, which is always the real possibility of, we could unplug the wing and make a wing with 2-inch more span, 1 extra bay. We could make an unequal panel wing, an equal panel wing, for anybody that just wants to try it both ways. This plane probably will give me the most trim choices that I've ever had. Okay, next step is going to be to pull that block off, and we want to hollow it out up in the front so we can see how the engine's going to fit in there. that I've found really works well. It's always difficult where you have a motor mount, plywood, and then balsa wood to get a smooth transition. So what I do is, after I have this rough sanded, I have the block removed, is just take some thin CA and soak the area, the whole area, back maybe you know, half an inch back onto the balsa wood. Don't let it harden. Just take a paper towel and wipe it. Now you let that kick, and when you just block sand that in, usually you get a really nice transition there. Don't use any kicker, just let it sit. Usually let it sit a minute or two before you sand it, and you get a real nice blend instead of a rough step kind of a transition. Alright, now we're ready to go get that piece. What I'll assume will hopefully become our funny car cowling. You see, they take a funny car and the whole body comes off with one bolt or something. Well, I don't know if this is really going to work that exactly that way, but I guess we're going to find out. But remember, even if it doesn't, we can cut pieces of this off and glue them in.
Now I got to make up a couple little scrap pieces to fill in this little gap between the nose ring here. I'll just make that up off camera. And then I want to, next step is going to be to hollow that out so we can see how the motor fit is going to work. Now the next step is going to be, obviously this is pretty easy to figure out, we want to hollow this whole chunk out. Need to take some around the nose ring because I want to be able to drop that on and get a feel for exactly how that fit is going to wind up in the final part.
Now one thing really is nice, if I were to be using real soft punk wood, it would make this carving a little bit easier, but again, I don't want to waste good wood on something that ultimately is just going to wind up being a plug. You can see the tool really doesn't want to get in there. You get spoiled using 4 to 6 pound wood. We just need to be able to get it over the motor so I can check for all the clearance. Make this fancy again. I just need to be able to get the motor in here. I'm not gonna even try to put a nice finish on it or anything. Just take enough material back, leaving a little extra material just make the plug a little stronger.
Now on the initial fit, I can see I need more clearance around the venturi. I sure don't want to make one of these fancy, things that you can't choke the engine. So the next step is going to be move this line further up and thin this all out. Now I have enough clearance, and I'm sure now that would leave me enough room here to get an air filter in, but I still want to have a little more clearance around here, and then I want to put an edge on this. I want to put the final shape, I want to put an edge on there. Now I want to flatten this area out and just bring this curve back just a little bit. Now I need to get the side angle just right too. Ooh, I love that sound. I just want to build up a little bit of an area here. I want to close this hole down just a little bit. I just tack glue in a piece of 16th, wrap it right around. That gives me a nice edge to work with. Now I can start to trim that away. A little filler block in there. And again, now when I want to tighten the clearance, I wrap another piece around here. If I want to widen it, I just sand it out. I want plenty of clearance around that venturi. Now the last thing is I'm going to put a little edge of 64th plywood around the inside here. And that's just so I have a nice edge to work off. I'll go around the whole perimeter with 64th plywood. Next is this little strip of 64th plywood with the grain going top to bottom. And I just want to make an edge. It won't matter where the joint is. It almost stays in place here if you get a nice cut. Now it's just a question with that ring in there of just trimming it off with the Dremel tool. And the reason for this whole thing is so I wind up with a hard edge to work off when I do the final shaping and sanding. COWL shape has really worked well for me over the years. What to do is make a flat plate to cover this so that you can then start putting a finish on this for the plug. We can't have this open when we make the mold. Now we've got this all blended and sanded in. We've got the nose sealed off. The next step on this, and I don't want to start it on this because we're on the end of the tape, is going to be to seal this with the method that I use. And it's only one of several other methods. There's the fiberglass method. You could cover this with half-ounce cloth and resin. That'd definitely work. I like to use CA, several coats, and dress it all off in BRODAK primer. We're basically going to do that on the next video. I got a couple little things I want to share with you before we end this tape. Now we're definitely ready to lay this up. And actually, by putting it on a separate tape, on the next tape, we'll have all the information relating to this. We're going to be doing some experimental stuff too. It may or may not pan out, but we will have the plug at the end of doing it. Well, hopefully we will anyway. And so far, if you followed the progress of this right from the very beginning, I'd say we're well on the way to having a pretty special model.